History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom.
Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're back for another edition, another episode of Fannie Lou's Classroom, and we are super duper excited about today's episode as we will honor the birthday of Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. Her birthday is actually on October the 6th. It's tomorrow, but we could not wait until next week to honor this beautiful soul, this beautiful life, and this beautiful spirit that remains with us even today, because as is often said, she will never die, because all the work that she has done and many who have continued to carry out her work in many different ways. And we're excited because we have one such person in the classroom on today. But before I get to that, because I messed up last week, Brooke reminded me, I didn't shout out the Fannie Lou Classroom team, and I have to do that. If it wasn't for the team, we wouldn't be ready to go and have this amazing podcast from week to week. So shout out to Brooke Mosley, who is our audio engineer that makes all of this work and run. She's always ahead of time, on time, and she made sure we're on time today because I was just talking. She said it's 12 o'clock, it's time to go. So Brooke was ready for us. And then, of course, Cheryl was scheduled to be with us on today, but she had some other pressing issues she had to manage on today. We want to definitely make sure we shout out Cheryl. She does a whole lot to make sure we're ready for the day. And then, of course, Sheneca is the guest on today. She's a member of the team. Put her on camera. She's not shy. And so Sheneca is here today as a special guest, as part of the team. You know, we always try to also make sure that we are able to express how grateful we are for the life and legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. Because of her, we certainly are the powerful Black women that we are today, and we don't take that for granted. So now I'm going to just jump right in, introduce our guest. She has done some amazing work around the life of Fannie Lou Hamer. So first I want to lift up the book she wrote. And I read it a few times and ignore all my little tabs here because I read and tab and underline everything. But this is a book by Dr. Katherine Crozier, and it's called Fannie Lou Hamer's Revolutionary Practical Theology, Racial and Environmental Justice Concerns. So, Dr. Crozier, I'm going to introduce you in a matter of moments, but where can we find this book? Because I didn't see it on Amazon. That's where I got my copy. But Sheneca had to go and get her copy from a different source. So what's the best way for folks to pick up a copy of this text?
Yes, thank you, Reverend Ayers. You can go to Brill, BRILL.com online, and that is where you will be able to find the copies of the book available at this time for $70 a copy of the paperback, or you can get your library to do an electronic copy, which will give people a broader access to it at the library. But if you want your own copy, you can get it for $70 at Brill.com. And then if your library has a copy, you can also get a $25 copy of the paperback as well. So please see me, email me, Karen at jewelofjustice.com if you're interested in the paperback copy at the reduced rate of $25 if your library, academic institution already has an electronic copy.
Wow, now that's what's up. We have to make this information accessible to everybody. You know, $70, that's nice little coins for a book. Now I bought mine already, so I purchased. I supported the sister. I supported the scholarship. But it's good to know, right, that you can get an electronic copy. And I'm hoping what can happen through our conversation on today as we honor the life and legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer is that people see the value in investing and learning more about her life. Because we're just going to touch on your book because there's too much good information in here to cover in an hour. So let me go ahead and introduce you so we can just kind of jump right into this conversation as we honor our ancestor in a way that certainly honors God too, the God that she served. And we're going to talk a little bit about that God that Fannie Lou Hamer served. So we have the Reverend Dr. Katherine Crozier. She is a proud daughter of Katherine, Kelley, and David Crozier, and a sister of 5 siblings. As a committed Christian academic, activist, and ordained minister for personal and social change, healing, and hope, Reverend Crozier brings a dynamic, energetic voice to her research, scholarship, and leadership. She is a native and current resident of Fresno, 93706. I hear you. I hear you shouting it out. With over 20 years of service in both education and church ministry, and 10 years of service in grassroots activism, advocacy, and organizing. Reverend Crozier received her BA in psychology from UCLA in 1991 and her MA in education, early childhood education, from California State University, Fresno in 1996, along with her multiple subject teacher's credential and cross-cultural language academic development credential in 1994 and 1999, respectively. In 2005, she received her MA in religious education and her PhD, earned PhD in theology and personality or practical theology in 2006 from both Claremont School of Theology. Currently, Dr. Crozier is the founder and president of Jewel of Justice, a consultant, executive coaching, and training business with focuses on women's personal and professional development. Jewel of Justice gives primary, though not sole, attention to women who serve and lead in congregations, community benefit organizations, and educational institutions ranging from early childhood education to graduate school. In addition, Jewel of Justice provides consulting and training on reparations, racial healing, and justice, and critical examination of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and paradigms. And Dr. Crozier, listen, you can get the rest of her bio on our YouTube because, look, the sister is big time. She has a lot of published work, not only this book, but she has a lot of other published work that you would definitely want to get off into. And I want to talk a little bit about, and I see here that you're currently, I don't know if this is still current, you're working on an essay entitled On Finding Home, a Social Political Statement for Black Liberation and Land Reclamation, which is deeply informed by the life, legacy, and theological praxis of Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm waiting on that. Is that still coming out? You still working on it?
Yes, it is still coming out in the process. Been accepted to present at the Circle of Concern African Women Theologian Conference in July of 2024 in Ghana. And so On Finding Home, a social, political, religious sacrament on Black liberation and land reclamation will be presented there. And will be the first time it will be public in Ghana in 2024.
What a fitting place to let it loose. I love it. Let's give it up for Dr. Katherine Crozier. Yeah, so we're excited to have you. And, of course, as a point of privilege, we were talking earlier, you reminded me of how we even met. And it's just funny how you meet people wherever you meet them and you circle back around years later to reconnect. And it's almost as if I've never stopped talking to you, right? You're such an amazing personality and just a warm spirit. When I met you, you were like that, right? You were kind of part of that in the group. We always looked to Karen to kind of have everybody smiling, having a good time. Even we got lost on the bus that time. You were on that bus. We didn't know where we were going. But we found our way to where we needed to go. You kept us all calm and sane. So I appreciate that. Years later.
Yes, I remember. Like our ancestor, Fannie Lou Hamer did, as we get into the conversation on her life and legacy, I'm reminded of that connection you just made when they were going to register for the first time on August 31st, 1962, her and 17 others from Ruleville, Mississippi.
Yes.
And how when they got there to the Indianola County Courthouse, they were surrounded by vigilante, law enforcement, dogs, and she said she had never seen so many a sea of blue in her life in the ways that they had showed up to try to intimidate, terrorize the Black folks who was exercising their humanity and dignity and creativity in showing up to vote. And the story goes, as everyone was scared and not sure how to respond, it was Mrs. Hamer who broke out in a song that enabled the people to find their voice, their strength, and their commitment to step on off that bus and to finish what they had started to do in trying to register to vote, despite the literacy test, despite the dogs, despite the police that was there, as well as the KKK White Citizen Council who came to say, we don't want you here. You don't belong this way. But it was because of her song, her spirit, and her commitment to freedom and justice that she was able to part the blue sea and lead the troops in to try to register to vote at the courthouse on that day.
Well, thank you for that introduction to the conversation. That was beautiful. I love how you taught. So you're saying you were our Fannie Lou Hamer on that bus in South Africa. We weren't sure where we were going. So thank you for that, because you helped us out. You helped us all out on that bus. So I want to start off. Well, I like to start off this way, which kind of make it personal for all of us who will kind of guide this conversation today. When did you first, and so I ask you, Dr. Crozier, first, then I'll ask Sheneca, and then I'll answer, and we'll kind of just go into some dialogue and question and answer kind of set up. When did you first come in contact with Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer?
I knew of Mrs. Hamer probably as from a distance growing up. However, I only knew her from the epithet, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. But it wasn't until 2014 when I got the book by Dr. Leah A. Williams, which is called Servants of the People, where she's a leadership, servant leadership scholar and researcher and leader. And she was providing a historical account of the Black women and men of the 1960s in providing us with an understanding of their particular leadership models and styles in which they engaged the people in for freedom and justice. And in her second edition of Leah Williams' text, she provided edition of New Women, which included Fannie Lou Hamer, and Ella Baker, and Septima Clark. And it was in that space where I read her contributing chapter on Fannie Lou Hamer 2014 that I was teaching and using for a honors leadership class at the university I was at that time, which was Fresno Pacific University. And in that honors leadership class, I was helping the students to understand the significance of Black and non-Black leaders and helping them to understand different styles and ways of how do we show up in the world to be consistent with our faith. And it was through that text that I saw that, Fannie Lou Hamer was involved in leading the Freedom Farm. She was engaged in doing in education. So she had a much broader engagement of life, of leadership beyond voting rights activism. And during that time, as well as being a person born in the Central Valley, which is known as the bread capital of the world, known as the raisin capital of the world, where we got highly agricultural base here in the Central Valley of Fresno, California, but yet we have greater concentrations of poverty. And Black folks, once upon a time, my parents and uncles and aunts and grandparents were a part of doing field labor here in the Central Valley until there was an influx of our brown sisters and brothers, in which the white landowners played the Black and brown against each other. And because Black folks were not able to get access to other jobs beyond the field, we were pushed out of the economic industry of field work, and we have been forgotten. And so it was knowing that I have roots from the South. My father is from Mississippi, and where Mrs. Hamer was born and reared, it was like, wow, we have a connection to the land, to the environment. We were the first internal refugees as Black folks, especially after the Civil War. We were immigrants, involuntary immigrants. So all these particular categories and designations that excluded Black folks who have been here, wow, I said, we have this historical connection, but we don't know. And it was in that space during that time, as environmental justice advocates were saying, Black people don't care about the land. And I have come to realize, because of my work with Fannie Lou Hamer, we ain't new to this, we true to this.
Right.
And so therefore, And that comes from Miss April Lee, who has a new book coming out on gardening and horticulture amongst Black church women in leadership. So yeah, that's a short story of my connection to both the personal, academic, and activist orientation. Is like, we are of the land. We are connected to the land, and we have an investment in what happens, but it is more in a holistic way than erasing the people from the land.
Thank you. I have so much has come out of just what you just shared that we can talk about the rest of the show, right? But I think two things I want to point out, and I think we'll kind of hear this as we, kind of unpack Fannie Lou Hamer throughout this hour, and that she was more, to your point, more than a civil rights leader. And I think about how you picked up on her work and how that steered you to your scholarship. And Heber Brown, right, picked up on Fannie Lou Hamer's life legacy and steered his scholarship toward food justice. So it just even shows you, right, the way in which that's why Fannie Lou Hamer will always live. Like, all the stuff she's done and how people are picking up and carrying out her work, she will never die, right? She's an ancestor who stays with us every single day. So thank you for that. I just think it's important for us to kind of see what our point of departure is, what she means to us personally, right? How we became familiarized with. So Sheneca. Yes. Talk to us about how you first became aware of who Fannie Lou Hamer was and kind of, what she means to you.
Definitely. I knew Fannie Lou Hamer from a distance, maybe PBS documentaries, growing up, and then every now and then doing Black history, doing school. So for me, it wasn't until I hit my 2 years at Friendship West this month.
Happy anniversary.
So it wasn't until this emerging experience at Friendship West and the birth of this podcast is when I really had to really dig into, learning more about Fannie Lou Hamer as not just an activist, a civil rights activist. And Reverend Ayers, she makes sure she pushes books on me where I'm learning more and more about Fannie Lou Hamer. But what I've learned about her as a person that's really been impacting the way I see activism and then also, social justice is how she was able to merge her faith and, justice work together. So that's something that I'm still for me, it's still a learning curve. So I'm still learning how to merge faith because, you hear all types of things growing up about faith and people don't really recognize faith and social justice as being one. Right. So I'm learning that a lot, and that's what's really intriguing to me about Fannie Lou Hamer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Crozier. So you see how I was immersed in D.C. I had to stand in for Dr. Crozier. So that's what Sheneca's referring to. But you see how beautiful, how she just laid that out so brilliantly. See, it's all working. It's all working. So, and for me, much like probably for the two of you, like me, I think the first thing, Dr. Crozier, was that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? I was like, who is this woman? This would have been, I don't know, definitely about 20 years ago, perhaps, when I heard that. But there are two things that I saw about Fannie Lou Hamer, and I was like, I want to know about her. She sings more of my speed, right? One was when I watched her testimony before the Credentials Committee. And I learned about why she was there and what happened to her, how she, how the president then, Lyndon Baines Johnson, intentionally, tried to have this press conference about nothing so that she wouldn't go on TV and people wouldn't see her testimony, only for it to really go viral, that you would say in today's terms, where she boldly, 10 toes down, never knocked off her square, stood squarely and looked those white men in their face and told them her story. And I felt like when her testimony shifted from about what happened, in terms of the beating that she took, that was almost unto death, that left her with health problems. But I feel like she shifted the conversation from that to the point that you even made, that she was more than civil rights. She was a human rights activist, She was more than, it wasn't just about voting for her. And I think when I heard that, I was like, and to do that, I said, what makes her so strong? It's like that. What manner of woman is this to stand back then to talk to the white folks like that? That was something that pulled me in just by itself. It was almost that Thurman question of what manner of spirit existed in the belly of those boats those slave ships that allowed our ancestors to survive, right? And I was like, I need to read more about her. Then I ran across a clip where it was just, she was on her porch being interviewed, and she made this statement. They were just asking her about, the threats on her life, etc. So Fannie Lou Hamer says, I keep a shotgun in every corner of my house. So if any cracker decide to throw something up on my porch, I'll make sure they never write home to their mama no more. So I was like, oh, she really about it, right? So I was like, oh, and so from there, I just really fell in love with Fannie Lou Hamer. And then I think of course, like Sheneca documentaries and just other books I've read about Fannie Lou Hamer, the more and more I learned, I was like, I love her. She was, without a formal education, she was heavily educated. Right? She was a brilliant woman. She was a genius, in my opinion, when we think about all she was able to do up against the system she was born into. And so, which is why we named the podcast after Fannie Lou Hamer, because I was like, everything that we're dealing with in America today in our communities, I feel Fannie Lou Hamer has as a framework of how we should view that, how we should look at that. And more importantly, I like the fact that she was rooted and grounded in her Blackness. Like she was not confused on who she was, despite growing up in Mississippi, down in the Delta, right? Where everything about that was telling her she was nothing, that she was clear about who she was. And that was a tribute to her parents too, right? Who instilled that in her. And then of course, the more I learned about the way in which she understood the Black church and how she understood Christ, how she understood God and the kingdom of God. So now I want to shift into our conversation for the day, because your book is brilliant. I love the way you laid your book out. So let's just kind of jump right in. And so the first thing I want to talk about, I'm going to turn to, I guess it's chapter 1 in your book. And I think you bring up the fact that she spoke at a Freedom Vote rally. And she took for her text, right? Her grounding text was Luke 4:18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, right? Because he's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of the sight of the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, right? And you go on to say, right, that Hamer and Jesus announced to their respective indigenous audiences the clear nature and scope of their public work. The Lord's Spirit appoints, affirms, and empowers their person and work. So kind of open that up a little bit more for us, because one of the things Sheneca mentioned, how she was saying that she's still learning that, how faith and public life intersect, that there's no disconnect. So talk to us about perhaps Fannie Lou Hamer's understanding of no separation of body, and so how the African part of understanding that they're not separate, but they are one, and just how she possibly came into that and how that really frames how she did the work that she did.
Yes, thank you, Reverend Ayers, for that setup. There's much that can be shared in that particular quote, but the first thing that I want to give attention to is that, like Jesus, Fannie Lou Hamer was outside of the institution in which she moved and lived and engaged in her work. And within Black Mississippi during her time, she had noted over 90% of them were raised in the church or were churchgoers. And so therefore, many of the Black Mississippians in the rural towns had an understanding of God, of faith. And the one thing that she was proud of is that she knew that within her church and family, they taught people how to love. And that was within them wherever they went, as they went, even as they tried to engage and come up against white supremacy, terror and oppression and subjugation within Jim Crow Mississippi. And so it was in that context that she was pulling from something that the people was aware of, but possibly did not understand how they can articulate and exercise their faith within that current moment. Because she had also indicated back in 1962, when Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Reverend James Bevel had preached to them from the chapter of Luke, Gospel of Luke 12, on the signs of the time. And so she was able to hear for the first time, oh, the seasons and what comes up and what is cropped and what is planted. This is our time to find our voice and to exercise it. Then when she heard after Reverend Bevel spoke to the Gospel of Luke narrative and the ways that she was able to understand this is our time, James Foreman of the SNCC's Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was able to help her to connect to her voting rights through the Constitution, because she didn't even know that she had a right to vote within the Constitution, or she was not clear. There's been some scholarship that says she didn't know, and then others said she had some idea, but had not been able to exercise that right to vote. And so it was in that moment where she was able to bring the biblical, the theological, and the material political worlds together in the ways that SNCC, SCLC, as well as the Congress of Racial Equality Corps, was able to create a mass rally of education, of inspiration for the people, for them to understand and tap into the significance of their faith for that moment. And so Fannie Lou Hamer was also at the time, as she brings up that text, is saying, y'all, I've been praying for this a long time. So she had been waiting for the moment for the divine to create and open a space for her to have a bigger platform to respond to the magnitude of the moment that was happening to her and her people. And so she had been cultivating a life of prayer, of discernment, of anticipation for the divine to interrupt and to give her the voice to be able to enter in. And when it came, she knew what it was and she responded accordingly. And so she was self-appointed by God, that she knew that this was God who had created this. And she also likened it to how she say, Bob Moses, who was the leading organizer on the ground for Freedom Summer and the voting rights campaign that was conducted in both 60 and 62 and 64 in Mississippi, 62 and 64 in Mississippi. His name was Moses. And so Fannie Lou Hamer interpret that symbolically. This is of God, because the same man that led the people out of Egypt, the Israelites, is the same man that God has sent to lead us, got the name of Moses. And so Dr. Rosetta Ross, in witnessing and testifying her work, she articulates how Hamer was able to interpret the civil rights movement with Christian language and symbols to help the people make meaning of what that moment meant for them within their faith tradition. And she continued to embolden others, regardless of their faith tradition, to show up and to engage people across different backgrounds, social, political, religious, spiritual backgrounds, based upon their ability to respond to what was happening to Black folks in the rural South.
Yes. Wow, that was powerful. That was so powerful. And I think one of the things you said was her ability, right, to really talk and connect with everybody. And I think you said she was, if I heard you, she's able to do that because it was rooted in a love ethic that she certainly had for herself and how she moved in the world. And that same type of love ethic also caused her to lovingly critique, right, some of the Black churches. Because she was saying, I want to be out there in the streets where it's happening, because that's where Christ was. So can you talk to us a little bit about, and you write about this, right, in chapter 1 of your book, of the way in which she was not fearful, and she was very forthrightly saying where the Black church was failing. And she loved the Black church. And I always tell people she loved the Black church, but she wasn't going to allow that to stop her, to your point of her self-appointed, this Kairos moment she found herself in, right, that the time is now. Right. And so can you talk to us a little bit about how she did that and why that's still important for us to do even today?
Yes, as I was sharing earlier, regarding the ways that she understood love as being an integral part of her identity And one of the things that is shared in the book as well is she wanted to be white when she was a little girl. And when she saw white people benefiting from Black labor and was able to have enough to eat, able to have nice houses to live in, nice cars to drive, and even as a domestic worker, she saw how the dog was even cared for over Black folks. And so therefore she understood like something is wrong here with this picture. The discontinuity or the disconnect between Christ dying to make us free and living and showing us how to live, that's not happening in our social, political, existential reality. So either God is a liar or we got to get up and do something to bring about this change as co-participants with the divine and as seeing Jesus as the ultimate model we need to be emulating. And so it was this deep love for herself, her mother, when she said, I want to be white, her mother had to stroke her young baby's ego and sense of self by saying there's nothing wrong with being Black, and was able to provide her youngest child of 20. Fannie Lou Hamer was the youngest of 20 children, 14 boys and 6 girls, and gave her a Black doll. And that became, biographers share, a tether, a grounding presence for her, along with the love and support that she received from her Black family and church. And so love was centered, love of self, love of others, and love of the divine, to say this must happen for us because this is not right. So she had a clear sense in her love ethic of right and wrong. There was no sugarcoating for her. Rhetoric scholar, communication scholar, Brooks provides us with an understanding of many of Fannie Lou Hamer's speeches that have been transcribed. And Fannie Lou Hamer always says when she would show up, I'm going to tell it like it is. I'm going to make it plain, because she felt like people needed to hear the truth. And so that was her prophetic voice and commitment to the people to understand what is really happening in Mississippi. But as she grew older and got more engaged in the work in the civil and human rights movement, she began to realize this was more than just a Southern problem. This is a U.S. problem. And she was able to say, wow, I'm going up south and down south, because the North, quote unquote, Northerners, they are just as bad as she understood with the problem of racism and oppression and controlling of Black lives without allowing for self-determination and engagement of what that means for who you are in relationship to Black lives, white people. She was making that plain and breaking it down on every level. When she was called a communist and saying that she was far left behind, and she would tell them, yeah, I've been far left, 400 years far left. And so she said, I don't know anything about what you're claiming that I'm a communist, but it don't take no communist to know that I don't have enough to eat. And our babies are not being taught the proper education, and we don't have shelter, and we don't have access to running water, and we don't have access to nutritious food, and we don't have access to healthcare. So she saw all the connections to life and land that was necessary for her well-being in ways that others were not able to name, who came from the North or who came from middle-class backgrounds, and that many of the pastors in the church's leadership was not in a position or didn't want to position themselves to go against their white master on the plantation, because many of the churches were on plantations. Many of the pastors as well were still abiding in appeasing the status quo. And Fannie Lou Hamer was aware of that. And even with the NAACP, it was known by many of folks in the South, like Fannie Lou Hamer, for the national advancement, National Association advancement for certain people and not
Right.
necessarily colored people.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, all of those different dynamics played into the reality of her distrust, legitimate distrust of the Black middle class, of the Black preachers, as well as a hope to say, we can do something different as you listen to and learn from the prophet, the love prophet that she was articulated through her voice and lived experience for people to see it differently and to respond differently than perpetuating the status quo.
Ooh, listen, we are talking to the amazing, gifted, prophetic Dr. Katherine Crozier on this week's episode of Fannie Lou's Classroom as we celebrate the life and legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer, who would be 106 on tomorrow, her birthday, October the 6th. Sheneca, you got anything you want to ask Dr. Crozier as a follow-up to all that she just brilliantly laid out? So much. That's what happens when you have so much brilliance. You said so much we want to tap into and kind of further unpack. You have anything you want to?
Yes, Dr. Crozier, you gave us so much. And even when I was reading through this book, I'm just reading little parts of the book, and I'm like, ooh, that's good. Ooh, that's good. So I just keep saying, ooh, that's good. But you talked a lot, you gave us a lot of information there, but you talked a lot about Fannie Lou Hamer seeing the divine in the movement. And one of the things that kept coming up in the book for me is that you didn't say that it was like a vision that she had, but I laid it out as like a vision that she had of a divine, because you named it a divine jubilee in Black reparations. And I just wanted to know, what exactly that meant to Fannie Lou and what you got out of what she was saying when she talked about, the divine jubilee in Black reparations.
Thank you for that. Yes, I appreciate the way that you said it was a vision or a dream that you was able to connect it to within our contemporary context. And Fannie Lou Hamer, in my study of her at this time, doesn't necessarily, I haven't ran across anything that she would say a vision or a dream that she had. It was the real live encounters. And so when we talk about in chapter 5, or when I discuss in chapter 5 regarding her revolutionary practical theology for Jubilee and Black reparations, I'm referring to the ways that when she was involved and engaged in her work on the ground, she was able to say, here is the eruption of the kingdom of God. Here is the opening up of society that was contrary to countercultural, contrary to the Jim Crow South. Here is what happened when the white students and the Black students from the North and the West had descended upon Mississippi down to the South and was able to come into their homes and look at them as if they were human, not as dogs, not as dumb, not as ignorant, but because of SNCC's motto of let the people decide, they came in with a whole new different orientation and understanding their role was to work alongside, not in front of, not instead of, but to work alongside and learn from the local people of Mississippi. So when she saw that people came in to see her as human and to see others of them as human, she was encouraged and strengthened and found her voice like never before. She makes it plain that if it had not been for SNCC, there would not have been a Fannie Lou Hamer. If there had not been for the brilliant design of the architect of Ella Baker of SNCC, there would not have been a Fannie Lou Hamer. And so therefore, she was able to say the kingdom of God erupted, divine intervention occurred in her everyday lived experience when it happened. So she was able to make those connections unabashedly. She was not ashamed to say, this is of the divine. This is my kin, my sister, my brother, because she also understood from her biblical hermeneutic coming from Acts 17:26, she would say, God made us, we are all from one parent. And so therefore we are one blood. And within that framework, she continued to exercise her love and the hope that that will become more expansive, not limited beyond just the work that in the kinships that were developed in SNCC, but it would expand even to affect the oppressive context in which she was in Mississippi. And so that was the Jubilee, the change of relationships, the writing of justice, the engendering of justice that I understand that she's referring to. And when it came to Black reparations, that was another whole level that she was aware of that was developed with Jim Foreman of SNCC at the National Black Economic Development Conference that occurred in 1969 in Detroit. And she was the only Black woman signature on that document that went to white religious congregations, Jews, Catholics, and Protestants, and in the tune of $500 million. And her commitment was, she was supportive. She wasn't at the conference, but Jim Foreman had reached out to her and said, we need your support, Mrs. Hamer. She understood, as long as it's helping Black people, I am down with this. And that's why she rightfully signed. And in that space, I have later come to realize that James Foreman, when they went into congregations to disrupt, so he was continuing the disruption because he would go into churches and in the middle of their worship and start speaking about the Black Manifesto, the Black reparations, and the role, the complicity that white religious congregations in the U.S. have played in slavery and our oppression. And now how can you make it right? And it was in that space that Mrs. Hamer understood, yes, the connection between Black people's liberation and Jubilee and making it right and helping white people to assume responsibility for what that is as we continue at the local level, when I say we as Black people, self-determine for ourselves, as well as understand the government's role and responsibility in caring for Black people. Did that answer your question?
That's good.
And so let's stay right there and let's talk to us about how you would see us carrying out that, what you just articulated, how she understood Black liberation, Jubilee, and our self-determination that is critical in this formula, right, to be liberated in freedom. Do we need that today? And is that missing in our Black churches today? Is this type of what I would call revolutionary practical theology, to use your language, right, about Fannie Lou Hamer, do you see that present today? And if not, is this something that we still need? And how do we do that? How do we begin to bust up in churches and break up this very way of having this dualistic theology, the separation from the body and the soul? How do we do that?
Woo!
That's your next 4 or 5 books.
Thank you for the question. One of the things that's coming up as you raise that question, I would say, yes, it is still needed. And that's a big part of my next publication on Finding Home, a social political sacrament for Black liberation and land reclamation, because we need, as people of faith, a social political paradigm in both private and public spaces where we are determining for ourselves how we are part of something bigger, both local and international, in the liberation of Black lives all over the world, and how we are creating the resources, the vision, and the epistemologies, meaning the knowledge to help make that happen, and not remaining confined by old paradigms and practices that are no longer serving us. And so therefore, what does it mean for us to understand that a social, political, spiritual reality is necessary for our now, and not just within our confined, cloistered spaces of our institutional denominational walls. Fannie Lou Hamer understood that Jesus was not confined in the monopoly of the church,
Right.
but Jesus, as the revolutionary, was out there where it was happening. And so therefore, she had a broader understanding of Jesus the Christ than many of us do even today, in the role that he played both on earth and as her continued inspiration in his death and resurrection. And so therefore, yes, a political revolutionary Jesus is necessary, for especially for our now,
Yes.
in light of the ways that so many different themes are being resurfaced in a more bolder, glaring way that we thought, oh, it was more hidden. Now it's just exposed. We knew all along, but now they don't have to hide it no more, because the dog whistling days are gone.
Right.
They don't have to do that politics anymore. They can just say they don't like us. So yes, a social, political, spiritual paradigm, practice, theology is necessary. And Fannie Lou Hamer understood that if the government didn't respond, then it would be violence. Because she said, people ain't just going to sit here and accept what y'all keep doing. She was not pro preemptive strike and taking people out. As you stated earlier, Reverend Ayers, she was down with making sure to protect and defend herself within any context in her private life at home. So Black folks in Mississippi carried guns. Black folks in Mississippi understood that while nonviolent direct action was necessary for a mobilized movement, but guns were not excluded, because they had to protect and defend themselves, and they knew the severity of what the risk that they were taking, both when they would mobilize to go out in numbers, or when they return home, when their homes could be blown up.
Yes. Wow. Well, it's so many ways we can go with everything you just said that I feel was so important. We're going to have you back for part 2 and 3. Very seriously, right? Because I think it's so much to continue to unpack, and what we have to continue to talk about. Because if we're not talking about it, if we're just in our silos writing about it or having a conversation with each other, it does not move us to where we need to go. So this needs to be more of a public, I feel, needs to be more of a public conversation, so we can all begin to think about what does it look like for us to have this new social and political reality. To your point, that is not just necessary, it is critical. Like, it's not an option. And I think I like the way you broaden it. And that's why I said it's a beautiful thing that you're going to do your, show your scholarship in Ghana, because it's also this notion of we are part of this diaspora, right? And the white domination the world over impacts all of us. So it's also how do we begin to connect these global struggles. So I want to, because I know our time is winding up, so I want to toss it to Sheneca to give maybe the final question that you may have for Dr. Crozier on the day, and then we'll begin to close out this week's episode.
Yes, Dr. Crozier, I like to talk about how all of this is relevant to us today. And you made the correlation in the book between, the civil rights movement and then the Black Lives Matter movement of today. And in what you said that, the young Black leaders of today refuse to acquiesce to the politics of respectability, in which clergy and protesters, like they wore their Sunday's best and different things like that in 1950s and 60s. So explain to us how other ways in which, we can correlate the Black Lives Matter movement today with the civil rights movement.
Yes, thank you for that question, Sheneca. One of the main things that I would like to raise out as far as connection is that Mrs. Hamer understood that it was the young people who were leading, who were the perceived as the most militant ones of her day. And she had more patience and love for the younger people than her peers and contemporaries, because she was tired and frustrated with the ways that they continued to acquiesce. So that included Black ministers. She called them chicken-eating preachers. That included the teachers as well. Black teachers who were in predominantly white schools or segregated Black schools, depending on the context that they were in. But they refused to get involved in those ways. And so the young people, Fannie Lou Hamer even said that the young people were the chosen people. Okay, so she, again, another religious Christian symbol, not that a nation is a chosen people. She was saying a generation is a chosen people. And so if we were to look at that today as people of faith, are we saying that the young people, regardless of their faith tradition or politics, are we saying in the ways that they are rising up, they are God's chosen people for our now? So a chosen people is not fixed. It is transient, meaning it can go for wherever God is doing God's action, and we are able to recognize that as being a divine intervention for our now, for our leadership, for our liberation, but it's not within one person, it's in a generation. So that's huge connection that Mrs. Hamer had with the 21st century Black Lives Movement and her own orientation and leadership of then, back in the 1960s and 70s. And I guess another connection I would just share regarding the significance of what she did. She, as a poor rural woman, that would be different because poor people had a greater space than what we know of today in the 21st century Black Lives Matter movement. Because of the ways that SNCC organized in the spaces and places that they entered, poor Black people assumed a greater role of visibility, of leadership, and articulation of what the issues and concerns were. So back then, they were more legitimate as far as addressing the vulnerable of the vulnerable and they having the platform. That is not necessarily the case in our contemporary Black Lives Matter movement for freedom and justice.
Wow. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Katherine Crozier, my friend and my sister. So good to reconnect with you on this podcast, and we will certainly have you back. I think there's so much more to unpack, so much more you have to offer, I think, as a pathway forward for our liberation, you know, the struggle that we continue to find ourselves in, and how we can really, you know, strive to create. Here at Friendship West, you know, our mission statement is that we are a game-changing Christian movement, connecting people to Christ, fighting for justice while creating the beloved community. And that's really what Hamer was going after, right? And that is not that's not about kumbaya moments. It's about doing the hard work.
Right.
And so that we want to break that up and let people know that means it requires to have a social and political reality that really seeks to liberate all people. Right. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for being with us today. Let's give a hand clap for Reverend Dr. Katherine Crozier in the classroom on today. Beautiful episode, beautiful soul. We thank you for being with us. And so check it. Few things I want to remind everybody about on next week. Really, we'll be picking up with the work of Fannie Lou Hamer on next week as we talk about food insecurity. You don't want to miss this episode. We're going to be talking to the Reverend Dr. Heber Brown, who modeled his work around food justice rooted in Fannie Lou Hamer's understanding of land and labor. So it's going to be a powerful episode. We're going to have Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith, who gives leadership to the Pan-African Women of Faith Collective at Bread for the World in Washington, D.C. And we're going to have our very own Gloria Shellman, who gives amazing leadership to our Faith from Human Services over at our old location, she and Flora Webb. But Gloria is going to come and sit with us as we talk about how do we really have control over our own food system and not be solely dependent upon really corporations who are then producing food food and how our food system, international particularly, is breaking down. And how can we make sure that we are able to feed ourselves? And that also speaks to how we're own land and land ownership. So it's going to be a powerful conversation on next week in the classroom, 12 o'clock, and of course, rebroadcast at 7. We also want to remind you to join us for our 5th annual Broughton Wells lecture series that will take place next week on the 10th and the 11th. We're super excited to continue our campaign to raise awareness around Black maternal health, and specifically the dastardly numbers around Black maternal and morbidity rates of Black women. So we'll continue to lift that up. And on Tuesday, we will have a conversation around the documentary Aftershock that will follow the lives of 2 women who did not survive childbirth, not because they were just unhealthy, but because of a health system that failed them because they did not choose to listen to Black women and to see the value of their lives as Black women. So that's going to be on Tuesday. We really are asking you to join us. It'll be in person only on Tuesday because we'll be streaming that via Hulu, and we can't have that streamed across the platforms. But make sure you can make your way to 2020 West Wheatland Road. Doesn't matter if you're a mother. It doesn't matter if you're a male. This issue impacts our entire community. So we're asking you to come and raise your awareness about Black maternal health, maternity and morbidity rates. And we're going to honor Representative Tony Rose, who is a House rep right here in the state of Texas, District 110. We're going to honor her for her ongoing work in the Texas legislature to really push forth not just Black maternal health, but maternal health for all women in the state of Texas. And this past session, she was instrumental in getting House Bill 12 passed, which expanded coverage for women who give birth from 6 months to 12 months. And that is absolutely critical that was passed, because most physicians recommend that women have post-birth care up to at least a year. So that's very critical, very important, and we're excited about what she's doing down in our legislative session. And then on Wednesdays we always have set aside for Theology Matters, because what we believe about God, our God talk matters. And so we try to do something every second Wednesday of the month to have a Theology Matters conversation. So we're excited to bring to Friendship West for the first time Dr. Anne Marie Mingo. And we're going to talk about, have you got good religion? She has a book coming out in 2024. You do not want to miss Wednesday night. She is going to be powerful. You heard Dr. Katherine Crozier, so we bring you the best, whether it's on a Wednesday or a Sunday or in the classroom. So you please make sure you tune in to listen to Dr. Anne Marie Mingo. And then lastly, as you see all the wonderful guests we bring in, you can help support us by purchasing a Fannie Lou Hamer t-shirt. And if you purchase one in the next couple of weeks, we'll have some extra goodies for you in your bag when you pay for your t-shirt. So that money just helps us to be able to run the podcast so we can continue to have conversations around the intersection of race, politics, and faith, because that's so critical and important. So make sure you like us, subscribe, share with all your family and friends, and make sure you have hit that notification bell so you can be alerted whenever we go live. So we look forward to seeing you on next week, 12 o'clock noon, right here in the classroom, rebroadcast at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Time. We'll see you next week in the classroom.
From the church house.